When was the last time a movie had you on the edge of your seat? The main character and their love interest are this close to realizing their feelings for each other, or maybe the main character's life is in mortal danger and they don't even know it yet. Today, I'll be discussing the latter, the kind of tension that makes you say, "Watch out!" at the screen, the kind of tension that makes your heartbeat speed up. And although the first genre of film that may come to mind is horror, I have a confession to make. When I'm looking for a good scare, I rarely turn to horror movies. I can count the number of horror movies I love on one hand because frankly the majority of quote-unquote scary movies aren't scary at all to me. They're missing the most important thing. Tension. Maybe you're thinking of some horror movie antagonists right now, the man-eating monsters, the crazy serial killers, the vengeful ghosts, and wondering how I could possibly claim that they don't scare me. And that's exactly the question I want to answer. What makes this scarier than this? The Naked Edge is a 1961 thriller film about a woman named Martha Radcliffe who begins to suspect her husband, George, of murder. It begins in the courtroom where George is testifying about a coworker of his being murdered right down the hall from his office. He claims that after stabbing his coworker, a mysterious figure took off with a bag full of money and chasing after the figure led him to another coworker named Heath, who he then boldly claims to be the murderer. The man is convicted, and George goes on to live his life, that is, until the past comes back to bite him. The plot of this movie isn't exactly unique. What I want to talk about is execution. At the beginning of The Naked Edge, we're made pretty familiar with George, but afterwards, we take in the clues of the mystery, for the most part, from Martha's perspective. She loves her husband and has no reason to believe that he's anything more than a witness to the murder. Even when they receive a blackmail letter accusing George of being the real culprit years later, she's shaken, but decides to brush it off. As the story unfolds, the psychological aspect of this film really shines. At first, she doesn't look for the clues, they just build up in front of her. She opens her eyes to how successful her husband is because of the incident years ago, and how little he actually tells her about his life outside of the house. Wondering if George might be lying to her about little things planted the seeds of doubt that allowed her to even consider the idea of her husband being a murderer and a thief. She fights desperately against that idea, trying to smile for her husband while the doubt eats away at her from the inside. She goes from content to paranoid, and that development reaches its peak at the cliff scene about an hour into the movie. Speaking of cliffs, I'm going to leave you on a cliffhanger for just a second as I provide a contrasting example of tension handled in film. Before I watched The Naked Edge, I watched a much more recent movie called Brightburn. I won't describe the plot to you, I'll just say that it's a horror movie and that its central character, a boy with powers, is also the main antagonist. And oh yeah, I hate this movie. I think it was one of the most mind-numbingly boring movies I've ever watched. There are plenty of scenes trying to be tense and scary, and yeah, a couple that made me gag or cover my eyes, but that's just shock value. Not once did I fear for any character's safety. I know I'm not supposed to be rooting for the boy because he's the one killing people for literally no reason, so does this movie expect me to worry over the random civilians he spends 10 minutes each chasing around? I predicted everything, this is no exaggeration, everything that happened in Brightburn. Spoiler alert if you care, the boy isn't the one who's in danger, so obviously he never loses. There are no doubts about morality or about who's in control, there's no fear of the unknown, there's no tension. That's not to say that horror movies with seemingly unbeatable antagonists can't be tense, quite the opposite. But I learned from my terrible experience with Brightburn that there are two crucial elements to tension in film, no matter the genre. 1. We don't know what's going to happen. When the protagonists clash with the story's antagonist, whether that be a deformed monster or a carnivorous animal or nosy relatives, the audience is unaware of the outcome. 2. We care about what's going to happen. You don't want your audience to think that the two kids being hunted by velociraptors deserve it since they're annoying anyways. Make us care about, at least for a moment, the victim in the situation, or else make us feel as if we're the ones in danger. Returning to the cliff scene in The Naked Edge, Martha and George are now at a point where she has openly expressed her doubts, and he has gone back and forth from empathetically reassuring her to intimidating her into silence. They're on their way home, and George parks the car, gets out, and invites Martha to join him by the cliff. Thanks to deliberate camera work and continuously great acting, it is at this moment where I was transported from being an observer following Martha through the story to someone right there with her, inches from a cliff, with an arm around my shoulder belonging to a man who could easily overpower me and push me to my death. The movie so far had laid the foundation for the mystery, planting seeds of doubt in our minds as well as in Martha's. This whole time, has George been trying to reassure her or gaslight her? Has he warned her of what might happen when she involves herself with a murder case out of concern? Or has he been subtly threatening her? Does he insist on his innocence because her mistrust hurts him, or because he doesn't want her to go to the police? The cliff scene for a split second turned my curiosity into fear because I could imagine myself in Martha's situation, not wanting to betray the person you love, but being unable to deny the sense that your life is in danger. Later on in the movie is another scene which I consider to be even better. A few significant things happen in the plot, and George eventually storms out of the house, leaving Martha on her own. For roughly 7 minutes, the soundtrack dies down to stillness, and there's little to no dialogue as Martha tries her best to carry on as if she isn't terrified of being alone in the big, empty, deafeningly silent house. Except, it isn't empty. An unidentifiable figure comes in from outside. Martha turns on the TV. The figure creeps upstairs, still unnoticed, and the music playing from the TV becomes our new soundtrack. Martha pours more alcohol and tries to sit down and just enjoy the music, but it isn't calming anymore. It just feels like a bad omen to her now, although she couldn't possibly know about the person making preparations in the bathroom upstairs. The camera inches closer to Martha's face, and she is no longer able to concentrate on the TV because of how alone and vulnerable she feels for seemingly no reason. She changes the channel to sports, then back again to the music. The song ends, and Martha turns the TV off just in time to hear a door closing somewhere in the house. But her experiences up to this point have taught her to second-guess herself constantly, to assume herself to be insane or paranoid. We, the audience, knows she's in danger, and deep down she knows she's in danger too. Or it could be that both Martha and the audience really are paranoid after all. You see, we don't know what will happen next, but we care about what happens next because ever since the cliff scene, or maybe since before then, we are Martha. These 7 minutes are the real star of this movie and really of this video. I won't be spoiling the movie's conclusion because I want you to watch it, even if only for the 7-minute scene. Moments like these, scenes like these, are what make all of Alfred Hitchcock's thrillers the masterpieces that they are. Just to be clear, The Naked Edge isn't an Alfred Hitchcock film just inspired by him. Now I'm not saying it's a masterpiece either, but what I will say it is tension in film done right.